It started like most messages do, quietly, without ceremony. A small buzz against the counter, a notification lighting up my phone screen in the dim kitchen. The words didn't shout, but they might as well have exploded. My son is in the emergency room. I sent it to Tessa, my wife of 5 years, the woman I'd moved mountains for, the woman I'd given everything to: resources, shelter, status. A woman who had once vowed to love not just me, but everything that came with me, including Milo. I didn't expect a flood of sympathy. We'd been distant lately, emotionally parallel, like two neighbors on opposite sides of a long fence. But what I got back, that was worse than distance. It was ice. I'm busy with my parents. We're having a barbecue party. That was it. No follow-up. No. Is he okay? No. What hospital? No heart. No humanity. Just smoke, music, and meat skewers. That's what took precedence over my son having a seizure. Then, as if salt was required for the wound, her mother's voice crackled through in the background. I hadn't even realized she was on speaker until her words landed, smug and soaked in that same smoky bravado. That boy's always sick. Maybe if his father did a better job raising him. It was like someone drove a nail into my chest. Not fast. Not clean. Slow. Deep. My hands went still. My face didn't contort in anger. There were no tears. Just a strange, quiet stillness. Like the moment water turns to ice. A final kind of cold. I looked at Milo, asleep on the hospital bed, hooked to monitors, a faint rhythm blipping on the screen above him. He'd been brave. He always was. My little fighter. My little boy. And I was tired of fighting alone. I picked up my phone again. Not to respond. Not to argue. I learned that words didn't work on people who treated love like a loan and respect like a bargaining chip. No, I went somewhere else. My banking apps, my asset manager, the admin dashboard for my company's fleet account. The house Tessa and I shared? My name was the only one on the deed. I remembered when we closed on it, how Frida boasted about how well-connected her daughter was to have landed a man who could afford such a place. Funny, they never mentioned that when dismissing me as just a single dad with baggage. The Benz her father drove? Leased through my company. The cards they used for emergency groceries, luxury spa days, and the occasional lavish dinner? All co-signed by me. They were extensions of my goodwill. And I was about to cut the power. In 10 minutes, it was done. I called the bank, froze the cards, logged into the dealership account, triggered the repossession flag on the Benz, opened the property tax portal and notified them of an impending deed transfer, except it wouldn't be to Tessa. It wasn't rage. I didn't feel like a man unleashing fury. I felt like a man flipping off the light switch in a room no one thanked him for illuminating. Back in the hospital, Milo stirred. His eyes opened slowly, glassy but conscious. I squeezed his hand. "Hey, champ," I whispered. "You're gonna be okay." He blinked up at me. "Is Tessa coming?" That question gutted me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I lied. "She's at the store. Getting you something." I think even he knew it was a lie, but he smiled anyway. That's the kind of kid Milo is. Always giving people one more chance to be better. But I was done giving. Tessa texted again, 2 hours later. "Did you need me to bring anything?" No apology. No rush. Just a hollow offer coated in casual indifference. I didn't reply. What could I say that hadn't already been screamed in silence? By the time the nurse told me Milo would be discharged the next morning, I had already decided. I would not be married to someone who treated my son like an afterthought. I would not pay another dime to uphold a system that devalued the very thing I cherished most. I stood beside Milo's bed, watched the monitors slow their beeping. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't confused. I was clear. This wasn't just the night my son had a health scare. This was the night I left the marriage emotionally, financially, spiritually. I hadn't packed a bag, hadn't signed papers. But the break had already happened. Not in fire. In frost. And frost never screams when it kills. When I first met Tessa, I thought I'd found home. Not just in her, though. Yes, her laugh had a kind of shimmer that made you believe the world was lighter with her in it. But in everything that surrounded her. Her parents, Frida and Winston, were polished and presentable, the kind of couple who always smelled like fresh coffee and high expectations. They wore their privilege like tailored suits, sharp, expensive, but always trying too hard to look casual. I mistook that performance for warmth. I mistook their photo-perfect smiles for inclusion. But the illusion cracked fast. I didn't notice at first. Love has a way of blurring sharp edges. The first holiday dinner we hosted as a couple, Milo had just turned 7. He wore a button-down shirt 2 sizes too big because he said he wanted to dress like a man. He offered Frida a Christmas card he'd made in school, glitter, macaroni, the works. She smiled, but her hand didn't reach for it. Instead, she passed it to Tessa and said, "You keep it. He's yours now, not ours." That was the first tremor. Small, easy to dismiss. Tessa said later, "That's just how she is, old-fashioned." I wanted to believe her. I told myself that time would soften them, that Milo would grow on them like moss on a wall. But walls don't love back. Tessa always insisted they'd come around. "They're not used to blended families," she said. "Give them a chance." So I gave them years of chances. Every awkward dinner, every underhanded comment, every dismissive glance they shot my son, I swallowed it. For her. For the idea that maybe one day Milo would be treated like he mattered. But that day never came. The night of Milo's seizure, I was in the ER clutching his hand, trying not to let him see how badly my own hands were shaking. His body had gone stiff in my arms when it happened. One moment he was watching cartoons on the couch, the next his cup dropped, his eyes rolled back, and I was dialing 911 with the kind of speed that only terror can teach. I didn't wait to see who would show up for us. I texted Tessa anyway. I still had some hope flickering inside me then, like a pilot light that hadn't quite gone out. I told her what happened, that we were in the emergency room, that I needed her. Not just to show up, but to care. And she replied that she was busy, having a barbecue. The message was so absurd it almost didn't compute at first. I read it twice, then a third time. And when I heard her mother's voice in the background dismissing Milo's condition as some ongoing inconvenience, it all snapped into focus. I wasn't part of their family. I was a means to an end. A wallet with arms. A driver who helped them get to their destinations but was never invited inside. And Milo? He was the proof. They didn't just ignore him. They erased him. It was all smoke and mirrors. They looked like a family, acted like one when the cameras were on, but when it came to doing the actual work, showing up, caring, stepping in, they vanished. They grilled ribs while I held my son's limp hand. They laughed while I signed hospital forms and whispered promises into his ear, telling him he'd be okay, even though I was praying just as hard to believe it myself. That night, as the nurse dimmed the lights and Milo finally slept, I leaned back in the hard plastic chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, each one like a blank answer to a question I'd stopped asking. This wasn't love. It wasn't family. It was a contract, and I was ready to cancel the terms. When Tessa walked in the next morning, smelling faintly of smoked meat and cheap wine, I didn't even rise from the chair. She looked tired but untouched, like someone who'd spent a night avoiding responsibility. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence between us had learned to speak on my behalf. She knelt beside the bed, looked at Milo, and said, "He looks better." "He's stable," I said flatly. She nodded, then whispered, "You should have told me it was this serious." "I did," I replied. "You just didn't care enough to believe me." We didn't argue. That's what made it worse. There was nothing to debate. Just truth, hanging in the air like the sterile scent of antiseptic. I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not mad you weren't there," I said. "I'm done pretending you ever would be." She blinked fast. "What does that mean?" "It means the mirrors are broken," I said. "And there's too much smoke to breathe." Tessa walked into the house like nothing had happened. The front door swung open, and there she was, wearing the same blue sundress she wore when she left for her parents' barbecue, her hair loosely tied back, strands escaping like they had stories of their own. She looked refreshed, maybe even a little too carefree, as if the night hadn't swallowed me whole. She paused in the hallway, staring at the cold plate of untouched takeout on the counter, then turned toward me, smiling faintly. "You made dinner?" I didn't blink. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, waiting to see if any of this was going to register. If the silence, the tension, the crack in the air would tell her something was wrong. But she just stood there, shrugging off her purse like she hadn't ignored a text about my son being in the hospital. "No," I said finally. "I canceled it." She raised an eyebrow, walking further into the room. "Canceled what?" "Your parents' mortgage," I said calmly. "The Benz lease. The credit cards. All of it." That stopped her. Her eyes widened, the slow kind of realization trickling through her face like ink bleeding through paper. "You can't just do that." "I can," I said, my voice as steady as the granite beneath our kitchen island. And I did. She didn't speak at first. I could see the gears turning, fast and loud behind her eyes. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't about understanding. It was about logistics, what this meant for her. She hadn't asked about Milo. Not once. The boy she once called her little buddy. The boy she promised to protect like her own. "You're being dramatic," she said finally, her arms folding across her chest. "No," I replied, standing now, slowly, because the weight of it all deserved intention. "I'm being done." She looked almost hurt, but not by the right thing. Not by what happened to Milo. Not by the complete absence of empathy from her family, but by the financial plug being pulled, by the comfort being challenged. "For 5 years, I've paid for everything," I said. "Groceries, vacations, your parents' overdue bills, even the down payment on Monica's condo. I did all that without complaint." Tessa swallowed, her jaw tightening. "And for what?" I continued. "For them to insult my son while you let them? For them to treat him like he's disposable? While you stand there with ribs on your breath and pretend it never happened? You're twisting this," she snapped. "You're punishing them for something they didn't mean." "They meant it," I cut in. "They've always meant it. You just chose to ignore it." She took a step back like my words had pushed her. "You're overreacting." "No," I said again. "I'm waking up." There was no shouting. No slammed doors. Just the flat thud of years of silent tolerance falling away. I realized I'd spent half a decade trying to earn a seat at a table where I was only ever served scraps. I dressed up for dinners with people who thought my son was a charity case. I smiled through toasts that subtly erased him from every family narrative. Tessa looked at me like she didn't recognize who I was. But that wasn't new. She'd been doing that since Milo came into the picture fully. Since I started saying no to weekend visits with her family when I saw how he was treated. Since I became a father first and a convenient husband second. She stepped forward. "We need to talk about this calmly." "No," I said. "We need to talk about it honestly." Her eyes flicked toward the stairs, toward the room where Milo was sleeping. Recovered now, thankfully, but still fragile. Still quiet in the way kids get after they've seen too much, felt too deeply. "I get it," she said, her voice suddenly softer. "You're upset. But this isn't how families work. You don't just shut everything off." "That's exactly how it works when there's no respect," I said. "Because respect is the minimum. Love doesn't excuse abuse. Family doesn't excuse neglect." There was a silence then. Deep. Hollow. The kind that fills up a room so tightly it chokes the oxygen out of it. "You said you'd always take care of me," she whispered. "I did," I replied. "And for too long. That included everyone else you let bleed me dry. But not anymore." She stared at me, trembling slightly, but still not crying. Tessa didn't cry for pain. She cried for consequence. And maybe, deep down, she knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I walked past her to the living room, picked up a small stack of envelopes from the side table, statements, bills, balances she never once asked about. I held them out. "This," I said, "was my mistake. Thinking love means sponsorship. Thinking partnership meant silence." She didn't take them, just stared. I set the stack down and walked upstairs to check on Milo. She didn't follow. By morning, the damage had circulated like gossip in a small town. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't made a scene, hadn't screamed into the void, but I didn't have to. Tessa must have called someone in a panic. Or maybe her parents noticed the halted payments, the declined cards, the sudden realization that the life they were coasting through wasn't on autopilot. It was running on fuel they never paid for. My fuel? Winston was the first to call. 8:15 on the dot. He always had this thing about starting the day with action. Today, that action was yelling into my ear like I was a disobedient employee. "You can't just pull the plug like that," he barked. "Not even a good morning." I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the steam curl upward like the smoke they'd basked in the night before, while my son lay pale in a hospital bed. I let the silence sit for a second before answering. "You're right," I said calmly. "I should have done it sooner. You selfish son of a..." Click. I hung up. Not out of anger. Not even for drama. I just didn't know him the performance anymore. I had spent 5 years swallowing disrespect in the name of peace, and the cost had added up, dollar by dollar, insult by insult. Today, the debt was due. And I was done subsidizing their sense of entitlement. The text came next. First from Tessa. Short, nervous ones. "Did you freeze Mom's credit card? They're saying the car is going to be repossessed. Can we talk before this gets worse?" Worse? As if this was just a misunderstanding. As if I was burning down something precious. The truth was, the fire had already been lit. It was just that no one had bothered to look past the smoke until now. Then came Monica. Her message was longer, meaner. Wow, you're seriously unhinged. This is what happens when people like you get money. You think you're a king or something. But guess what? You're not even blood. Milo's not even their grandkid. Get over it. I read it once. Then again. Then I locked my phone and set it down before I cracked the screen. That one stung, not because it was a surprise, but because it confirmed what I'd always feared. They didn't just dislike Milo. They didn't see him at all. In their eyes, he wasn't part of the tree. He was a fallen leaf someone had stepped over on their way to the grill. It was never about a barbecue. It was about priorities. It was about who mattered when no one was watching. And for them, my son had never been on the list. The irony was thick. The only time I was considered family was when I was paying like one. When my money paid for vacations, for spa days, for overdue dental work and holiday decor. When it came time for hugs or photos, Milo and I became shadows in the corner, barely acknowledged. They'd talk about family traditions, but never let him hang the ornaments. They toasted milestones, but he was never in the pictures. At every gathering, they made sure he knew. He wasn't theirs. So no, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel dramatic. I felt awake. And honestly, it was quiet. Refreshing. Like finally opening a window in a smoke-filled room. Tessa tried calling later that afternoon. I let it ring out. Instead, I went for a walk with Milo. He was doing better. Tired, yes, but stronger. The seizure had passed, but the emotional weight still lingered in his posture. He asked me if we were going to visit them again. Do you want to? I asked, keeping my voice even. He shook his head. They don't really like me there. I stopped walking and knelt in front of him, meeting his eyes. It's not your job to be liked by people who can't see how amazing you are. He nodded slowly, and I saw it click, something small and quiet in his chest. Like he'd been holding that truth inside, waiting for someone to say it out loud. We walked on, past the neighborhood park, past the corner store with the bell on the door, past the illusion I'd lived in for years. When we got back home, I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Nothing fancy, but Milo said it was the best meal he'd had in weeks. We ate on the couch with a blanket over our laps, cartoons playing softly in the background. Meanwhile, the phone kept buzzing in the other room. I didn't check it. I knew what it was: more guilt, more deflection, more desperation disguised as outrage. But I was done breathing in their smoke. Let the bridges burn. I wasn't crossing back over them anyway. A week passed before I went back. Not to make amends, there was nothing left to mend, but to collect what was still mine. A few suits. Some tools I had left in the garage. Milo's sketchbooks. The rest of it could rot there, absorbed by that sterile house with its fake warmth and curated civility. Tessa said she'd be at her parents'. I didn't ask why. I assumed she needed space, either to process or to let Frida and Winston coach her on how to handle me now that the gold had stopped flowing. Either way, I didn't care. I wanted in and out. Quiet, fast, no confrontation. The house was exactly as I remembered, but colder. The walls had always been white, but now they looked bleached of life. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and silence. I walked through the hallway, toward the closet in the guest room, our guest room, technically, but the one I'd started sleeping in more often. That quiet decision we never acknowledged. Me drifting further from her side of the bed, then eventually out of the bed altogether. 1 inch at a time until even our breathing no longer aligned. The hallway was lined with photos. It always had been. The Dalton family legacy. Smiles caught mid-laugh, posed brunches, graduation day snaps. There was Monica in her wedding dress, beaming next to a man who'd cheated on her twice by the honeymoon. There was Tessa, mortarboard tilted on her perfect hair, flanked by her parents, Frida's lipstick red and loud, Winston looking like he belonged in a cigar commercial. There were nieces and nephews. A beach photo with someone's golden retriever. Even their family friend Dwight, holding up a fish from a lake trip I wasn't invited to. But not one picture of me. Not one of Milo. Not even a blurry background image where we'd been cropped in or out. I stood there, numb at first, then hollow, then something deeper, something that scraped against the ribs. I leaned closer, scanning the rows again. Surely, I had missed something. A frame tucked in the corner? A side table display? Anything? Nothing. 5 years. Dozens of visits. Birthdays. Holidays. And not one visual acknowledgement that I ever existed in their world. I remembered the time Milo had drawn a picture of the whole family. Stick figures. He labeled them, me, Tessa, himself, even the dog we almost adopted. And he added Frida and Winston, because he wanted to be kind. He asked if we could hang it in their hallway. I had smiled and said, maybe next time. I should have told him the truth. Milo had asked once, softly, during a holiday dinner where no one refilled his juice glass, how come there's no picture of us here? I told him, they just haven't printed one yet. What a lie. The kind of lie parents tell when they want to shield their children from the ugliness of the world. When they hope the love they give is enough to outshine the love withheld by others. I wanted to believe that if I kept pretending, if I kept paying, they'd eventually change. But people don't change for comfort. They change when it costs them something to stay the same. I turned from the wall and walked to the guest room. Packed my duffel with clothes. Found Milo's sketchbooks in the bottom drawer where Tessa had stashed them during one of her clean sweeps. One of them was open to a page he'd drawn of our living room, me asleep on the couch and curled beside me. The caption in his handwriting said, "Home is here." I took that one, put it carefully in the bag. On my way out, I passed the kitchen and noticed the mail pile. A bill from the spa Frida frequented. A loan statement from Winston's watch purchase. All in my name. All neatly arranged like I'd be coming back to pay them. I placed them in the trash. I didn't take any of the framed photos from the wall. That wasn't my job. My presence never lived there anyway. But before I stepped out, I opened one drawer, the sideboard where Tessa kept old picture prints and extra frames. I knew she once kept a picture of me and Milo there. The day we built his first Lego ship. A goofy grin on his face, a smudge of chocolate on mine. Pure. Real. It was gone. Replaced by more prints of beach days and brunches I never attended. That was the final answer I didn't know I'd come looking for. This wasn't just a family I'd married into. It was a stage. And we were never part of the script. I left the house without looking back. Slammed nothing. Broke nothing. But as I closed the door behind me, I knew what I had just done wasn't walking out. It was waking up. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and quiet, the kind of day where even the birds seemed to keep their opinions to themselves. Milo was curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a cartoon playing at low volume. He hadn't said much since we got home from the hospital. He was healing, but there was a silence in him that hadn't been there before. A new kind of stillness I didn't like. Then my phone rang. Unknown number, but I picked it up anyway. I'd had enough silence for the week. Is Milo okay? That voice, firm, familiar, and laced with urgency. Sharon. Tessa's aunt by blood. My ex-wife's sister by law. But in truth, the only person from that whole web of family who had ever looked at my son and seen him. Not as a footnote. Not as a burden. As a boy. As a child. As a human being. I swallowed hard. Yeah, I said. He's better. Still recovering. There was a pause. I heard what happened, not from Tessa. Monica posted something stupid about losing perks. I figured something bigger went down. I sighed, sitting at the edge of the couch, my hand resting on Milo's blanket-covered foot. Bigger is one word for it. Another pause. Then, I'm coming over. She didn't ask. She didn't offer politely. She just said it and meant it. 20 minutes later, she was knocking on the door with a bag of homemade soup and a tin of those weird little breadsticks Milo liked from that Italian deli across town. Her husband Greg followed behind her, balancing a stack of comic books like he was carrying gold. They didn't even hesitate. Sharon walked right in and knelt by the couch, brushing the hair from Milo's forehead like she'd done it 100 times. Greg sat cross-legged on the floor, laying out the comics like it was Christmas morning. Milo's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in days. And me? I just stood there, taking in the scene like a man witnessing something sacred. No lecture. No backhanded questions. No, well, maybe he's overreacting. Just soup. Comic books. And presents. You hungry? Sharon asked him. He nodded. She headed to the kitchen without waiting for permission. I heard cabinets open, a pot set down, the hum of familiarity that only comes from someone who sees your home as theirs not because of entitlement, but because of love. I leaned against the wall, watching Greg hold up a copy of The Flash and read it aloud with voices. Milo giggled, that real kind of laugh, the kind that doesn't stop at the mouth but spills out of the chest. It caught me off guard. That sound, that warmth. Like color seeping back into a washed-out world. Sharon came back with a steaming bowl, blue on the surface, and handed it to Milo herself. Then she looked at me. Not with pity, not with judgment. With clarity. She didn't ask what happened with Tessa. She didn't need the whole story. She already understood. I remember when Rena left, she said quietly, sitting beside me now. People thought I was crazy for still checking in on you. Said I should mind my lane. But I saw what you did for that boy. That was always enough for me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. She rested a hand on my shoulder. You don't owe anyone explanations. You did what needed doing. I looked at her, voice low. It just hurts. I thought I was building something solid. And now, I'm not even sure what's left. She smiled gently. You are what's left. You and him. That's enough. Greg chimed in from the floor. We're gonna come by every week, all right? Comic drop-offs, soup rotation, whatever. Milo's got us. Milo beamed, mouthful of noodles, and gave a dramatic thumbs up. I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. That's when it clicked. Family isn't a bloodline. It's not who's listed on a tree or who shares a last name. It's not who shows up in the photos or makes the loudest toast. Family is who shows up, who brings soup without being asked, who sits on the floor with comics because they know a child needs to smile again. I had spent so long trying to impress the wrong people, trying to earn a space in a house that was never built to include me. But right here, in this living room, with the smell of soup and the sound of paper flipping and laughter bubbling over the edges of grief, this was family. This was enough. When they left that night, Milo hugged Sharon so tightly her glasses nearly fell off. Greg tousled his hair and promised to return with the next volume and possibly some gummy worms. I watched them drive off with headlights cutting through the dusk. I closed the door and turned to Milo, who was now lying on the floor, a comic covering his face. He pulled it down and grinned. That was awesome. Yeah, I said. It really was. And for the first time in months, I meant it. Tessa came back 2 days later. No warning. No polite knock. Just the familiar sound of her keys twisting in the lock, like she still had permission to walk in without asking. I was sitting at the dining table with Milo, working through his math worksheet. He was focused, tongue poking out in concentration, tapping his pencil against his cheek as he tried to remember how to multiply fractions. The moment the door opened, he stiffened. His pencil froze midair. I watched the tension crawl up his shoulders like vines. Tessa stepped inside slowly, dressed down, no makeup, hair pulled into a messy bun, hoodie and jeans instead of her usual curated perfection. She looked unarmored, but not apologetic. I stood up. Hey, bud, I said softly. Go finish this in your room, okay? He looked at me, then at her, then nodded and slipped away without a word. She closed the door behind her and didn't move any further. She just stood there, fingers clenching the strap of her bag. I've been staying at my parents', she started, voice hoarse. I figured, I said. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't move to make coffee or small talk. I wasn't going to cushion this moment. Not anymore. I needed time to think. You've had years. She flinched. It was small, but it was there. A ripple in the perfect surface she always tried to present. You're really going through with this? She asked. Freezing them out? Leaving me? I'm not freezing anyone out, I said. I'm walking away from disrespect. That's not the same thing. Her eyes brimmed. She took a shaky breath. You're abandoning my family. That word, abandoning, it hit like a slap. I stepped toward her, slowly, deliberately. Not aggressive. Just grounded. No, I said. Your family abandoned my son. Again. And again. And you let them. I didn't. You did. My voice rose, not in volume, but in certainty. You stood by. You watched them talk around him, exclude him, insult him. And instead of standing up for him, you told me to give them time. Like he was some inconvenience they'd eventually grow to tolerate. She shook her head, tears slipping now. I didn't know how to handle it. I was scared. I didn't want to make things worse. You didn't want to make them uncomfortable, I said. But you didn't mind making us small. You chose their comfort over our dignity. She sank into a chair finally, arms wrapped around herself like she could hold in the unraveling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I sat across from her, hands folded. Tessa, this isn't just about the barbecue. It's about years of silence. Years of you watching them treat Milo like a second-class guest in his own life. And I kept thinking, maybe next holiday, maybe next visit, maybe she'll finally say something. But you never did. I thought if I kept the peace. You weren't keeping peace. You were preserving appearances. There's a difference. She wiped her eyes and looked at me with something close to desperation. I was scared they'd disown me. I let the words hang in the air for a second. Then maybe they should have. She blinked. What? If they were willing to disown you for standing up for a child, your stepson, then they already disowned decency. You just hadn't noticed yet. She crumbled then. not just tears collapse. Shoulders hunched, face buried in her hands, sobs shuddering out of her like she was coming apart. But it wasn't grief. It was shame, maybe guilt, or maybe just the realization that the person she pretended to be, this strong, modern woman with backbone and heart, had never really existed in this story. Not when it counted. I didn't reach for her. I didn't offer comfort. That used to be my role. Buffer, fixer, forgiver. But I'd retired that job. I'd already been enough things to people who gave nothing back. After a while, she calmed down enough to speak again. Are you going to divorce me? I didn't answer right away. I looked toward the hallway where Milo had gone, where I knew he was quietly listening from the crack in the door. I always forgot how much kids hear. I've already called a lawyer, I said finally. We're discussing next steps. She didn't fight it. She didn't beg. That was the most revealing part. Deep down, she knew this was coming. She just hadn't believed I'd follow through. You loved me, she said, not as a question but a memory. I did, I said. But love without respect? That's just slow heartbreak. And I'm done bleeding for people who wouldn't even call the hospital. She didn't say anything after that. She left 15 minutes later. Quietly. No slamming doors. No second goodbye. Just the sound of footsteps moving away, for once, not mine. And for the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like air. It had been 2 weeks since I severed the last of the financial ties. 2 weeks of silence from the Dalton household. No visits, no texts from Tessa, no guilt-soaked voicemails. Just the occasional echo in my inbox from banks and creditors now knocking on the doors they used to assume I'd keep open. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd let the silence grow into acceptance. That they'd lick their wounds in private and move on. I underestimated how quickly desperation eats away at pride. The message came late on a Thursday. Not a text. A phone call. From Winston's number. I hesitated before answering. I didn't want another tirade. I wasn't interested in rage or revisionist history. But a part of me was curious. What did the patriarch of a crumbling financial facade sound like when the lights started shutting off? I picked up. At first, nothing. Just the quiet inhale of someone trying to decide how much of themselves to put into a plea. Then, finally, they're going to repossess the car. His voice was soft. Not angry. Not condescending. Just tired. The way a man sounds when he's realizing that the world no longer turns because he says it should. I said nothing. And Frida's blood pressure meds aren't covered anymore. They dropped us. You know how tight things have been. Tight, I echoed. You mean all those spa days? Or the annual ski trip where I got a souvenir mug while you booked a suite I paid for? That's not fair, he snapped, the old tone trying to claw its way back. But even he didn't believe it. We didn't think you'd stop paying your bills? I cut in. No. You didn't think I'd grow a spine. He sighed. Look, I know things got heated. Emotions ran high. I actually laughed. You mean when your wife implied my son's seizures were because I was a bad parent? That kind of emotional. There was a pause. Long waited. But still, no apology. Be reasonable, he said eventually. We're family. And there it was. The word they only remembered when their accounts ran dry. No, Winston, I said, leaning back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as Milo hummed softly in the next room. You're not family. You're a series of transactions dressed up in Sunday manners. And the account is closed. You're punishing all of us for something Frida said. I'm holding all of you accountable for everything you allowed. For every room you let my son walk into and feel like you didn't belong. For every time you looked through him instead of at him. And for every time you leaned on me without offering a damn ounce of decency in return. I didn't know it had gotten this bad, he said. You knew. You just didn't care until the Benz was on a tow truck. He had the audacity to chuckle, a hollow little sound. I'll admit, we may have taken your support for granted. Support, I repeated. You mean me paying off your mortgage arrears while Frida told her friends I was just a single father with lucky timing? That kind of support. He didn't respond. Maybe he was out of excuses. Or maybe he was finally choking on the taste of his own self-importance. Then he said it. We just want peace. And I shook my head slowly, smiling sadly to myself. Peace, I said, isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of respect. You never gave me either. What you want is silence. Submission. A return to how it was when I was useful and quiet. That's not true, he said. It is. And you know it. And if Frida's blood pressure's up now, that's not my doing. That's years of entitlement finally hitting a wall. He tried again. Don't do this for Milo's sake. One day, he'll want to know his family. He already knows them, I said. He knows who showed up. Who brought him soup? Who read him comics on the floor? And none of them share your last name. That ended the conversation. I hung up, not out of rage, but out of clarity. Winston didn't call because he missed us. He called because the bill had arrived, and for the first time, it had his name on it. I looked over at Milo, who had just walked in holding one of the comics Greg had brought. He was smiling, asking if we could read together. I scooped him up onto the couch, pulled a blanket over us, and nodded. That was my peace. That was my family. And I didn't owe another cent to anyone who didn't know how to protect either. It was Sunday morning. Quiet, slow, and cool enough to leave the windows open. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee, the sound of the machine humming gently while bacon sizzled on the stove. Milo sat at the dining table with colored pencils spread out in front of him, his small fingers smudged with red and green. He was working on a school project, his family tree. I hadn't asked many questions. I figured it was just another worksheet, another class display that would hang in a hallway for parent-teacher night. But something about how quiet he was being drew me over. I walked around the island and leaned slightly, peering over his shoulder. He'd started at the top. Sharon and Greg. Two smiling stick figures, holding hands, with a golden star drawn above their heads. Below them, a branch connected to me, and beside me, Rena, his biological mom. There were more lines, smaller figures. And then, right at the bottom center, was Milo. Smiling. Big head, tiny body. Arms stretched like he was hugging the whole tree from the roots. I blinked. My heart swelled, then twisted. No Tessa. No Frida. No Winston. No Monica. Just the people who'd shown up. Is this everyone? I asked softly, crouching beside him so I was eye level. He looked up and nodded without hesitation. Yeah, I didn't want to put people I don't really know. I studied his face. There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger. Just certainty. The same kind I'd felt recently, raw, rooted, real. You're okay with that? I asked gently. He nodded again. They didn't come to the hospital. Sharon did. Greg did. They bring soup. They come to our house. That's family, right? God. I had to look away for a second. His words, spoken so plainly, cut through years of confusion I'd allowed to cloud my own thinking. He wasn't just drawing a tree. He was redrawing truth. From scratch. With crayons and unfiltered honesty. I nodded. Yeah, bud. That's exactly what family is. He smiled wide. Can you help me draw you better? Your arms are weird. I laughed through the lump in my throat and picked up a pencil. Sure. Let's fix those arms. We worked on it together. Added more details. Greg's glasses. Sharon's earrings. Rena's bright lipstick that Milo always noticed. We added the dog Greg and Sharon were fostering. Milo insisted the dog counted too. It was one of those rare moments where time felt irrelevant. Just a father and son, pencils and paper, and the rebuilding of identity happening in real time. Later that afternoon, Milo taped the finished tree to the fridge. He looked at it like it was sacred. I looked at it like it was proof. That evening, we went for a walk. Just the two of us, hand in hand, the way we used to when he was small and everything felt larger than life. We passed by the park, the school, the little bakery we sometimes stopped at for cinnamon rolls. He tugged my arm. Can we send a picture of the tree to Sharon? Yeah, I said. That's a great idea. She'll like it, he said with certainty. She'll be proud. And that was it, that word. Proud. Frida had never said it. Not once. Not even when Milo brought home perfect grades or won the reading competition. Tessa had said it, sure, but only in the way people say it because they're supposed to. But Sharon? Sharon said it and meant it. Every single time. When we got home, I took a photo of the family tree and texted it to Sharon. Her reply came 10 minutes later. This just made me cry. Can I print this and hang it on our wall? I showed Milo, and he beamed. Told you she'd love it. You sure you don't want to include Tessa? I asked carefully. It's okay if you do. He shook his head without pause. I used to, but I waited a long time for her to come around. And she didn't. So, I stopped waiting. There was no hate in his voice. Just wisdom. The kind that shouldn't belong to a 10-year-old, but somehow did. I don't hate her, he added. But she doesn't feel like part of this anymore. And he pointed to the tree. His truth. That night, he went to bed early. Tired from the sun, from the drawing, from the clarity. I stood in the kitchen with the fridge lights spilling over the linoleum, staring at that piece of paper. It was messy, colorful, childlike, and absolutely perfect. Because it told the truth. For years, I had believed that love was something you fought to keep, even when it didn't fight back. That family was defined by names and rings and proximity. But Milo, my boy, my mirror, had seen through all of it. He had built his family tree the way we should all build our lives. Not by blood, but by presence. It came full circle with a phone call. A voice I hadn't heard in weeks, Frida's. Her number flashed across the screen like a bad habit I'd finally broken but hadn't deleted. I hesitated. I didn't want more excuses, more gaslighting dressed up as concern. But something in me, maybe the part that still wanted finality, answered. Her voice was different this time. Not cold, not sharp, just empty. "Winston's sick," she said. "The stress has gotten to him. And Monica moved out. She's back with that idiot from college. We're drowning." I didn't respond right away. I stared out the living room window, watched the wind stir the branches of the oak tree in our front yard, and let the silence hold for once. "I thought you should know," she continued, "since you are part of the family." I let that word hang in the air. Are, like she couldn't decide which tense to use. I finally said, "So was I, and none of you cared." Her breath hitched. We didn't realize how far things had gone. No, they never did, because they never looked past their own needs, their own comfort, their own expectations of what I was supposed to provide without asking for anything in return. "You didn't call when Milo was in the ER," I said, steady. "You didn't visit, didn't text. But now that your life is unraveling, suddenly I'm worth dialing again." "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered. "You meant it exactly like that," I said. "And that's the problem." She went quiet for a while. I could hear something clinking in the background, maybe a spoon against a mug, maybe her wedding ring tapping the table like it used to when she was impatient during dinners. "You were always the stable one," she said eventually. "The one who held things together." "I was the convenient one," I corrected. "The one who paid and stayed quiet." Her voice cracked then. "But we're still family." "No," I said, calm and final. "We were a transaction, and that account is closed." There was nothing left to argue. No more roles to pretend. No more borrowed titles like son-in-law or uncle. Just the truth, ugly and clean. I ended the call. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't want one. Then I blocked the number. The world didn't shake. The sky didn't fall. But something inside me lifted. That invisible weight that had followed me for years. This dull ache of responsibility for people who never reciprocated, evaporated. It was gone. And in its place, there was peace. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. That night, Milo and I went to Greg's birthday dinner. It was nothing fancy, just a backyard gathering at their place with string lights tangled in the branches, folding tables draped in checkered cloths, and a dozen people who actually wanted to be there. Sharon had baked one of her famous cakes, chocolate fudge with caramel swirls. The kind of cake that required zero occasion, but made every occasion feel bigger. When we walked in, Greg called out, "There's my co-pilot," and scooped Milo into a dramatic one-armed hug. Milo laughed so hard he dropped the card he made, which Greg picked up like it was a golden award. Sharon raised a toast a little later. She tapped her glass and waited for the chatter to settle. When it did, she smiled. One of those deep, knowing smiles, and said, "To Greg, and to family, not the kind we're born into, but the kind we build." Then she looked at me. "And to the people who choose to show up. Every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." The table clinked glasses. Milo took a sip of his milk, then laughed so hard at something Greg whispered that it came right out of his nose. He tried to cover it with a napkin, but it was too late. Everyone was laughing, him most of all. I hadn't seen him laugh like that in months. That carefree kind of joy. The kind that says I'm safe here. And I realized something right then. This was the ending I didn't know I needed. Not revenge, not vindication, just release. A goodbye, not to people, but to guilt. To the belief that I had to keep proving myself to those who'd already decided I wasn't enough. To the weight of trying to make a child feel welcome in a house where he was only ever tolerated. To the lie that family is duty, no matter the cost. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had something better. Laughter, love, presence. Not bought, not forced, earned. Milo reached over, tugged at my sleeve, and grinned. "This is the best party ever." "Yeah," I said, ruffling his hair. "It really is." And for the first time in years, I wasn't paying for any of it. I was living in it.